Recording. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fortnightly Patient Summary FHIR IG call. So my name is Ricardo Ignacio. I'll be your chair for today's meeting. Before we get stuck in the agenda for today's meeting, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. So this is the agenda for today's meeting. So we'll go through a very quick round of usual business and updates, and then we'll have a walkthrough of two profiles that are in scope for the upcoming release one of Patient Summary. So we'll go through bundle and composition, and this is Danielle who will take us through this part of the agenda and the meeting. And then we'll we'll have a quick discussion about some of the use cases and the use cases we have out for review. And then we'll go through testing scenarios and priorities with Steve and cover off the next meetings and the next steps from here. Just a reminder, and you would have seen this slide a few times previously, so just a reminder of what's currently proposed to be in scope for the Australian Patient Summary release 1. So as I've mentioned previously, we will focus today on doing a bit of a walkthrough of the bundle and composition. And as always, like if you spot anything, the idea with this walkthrough is to raise the general knowledge of what's being included, but at the same time, if you spot anything, any bugs, any issues, yeah, it's an opportunity also to use this to flag that and to raise these things. We're also after potentially some additional information on examples you might want to add to the specifications. So yeah, just bear that in mind when you're going through this process. A quick refresher on the timeframes we're working towards to. You would have again seen this previously, but what we have here on the right is really what we aiming for to get to. So we're trying to get to a ballot for comment period between the 11th of August and the 7th of the 9th. So between now and the 11th of August, we will be kind of making sure that everything is ready to go. And at that stage, we will then open up the patient summary spec for ballot for comment. Just a reminder that if you haven't done this already, and if you want to participate in the upcoming ballot, this is the process you should be following. So there's some prerequisites like being a National Centre Australia member, having your account set up in Confluence and Jira, etc. So just a reminder that if you're interested in participating in the ballot, please follow these steps. So we'll now go into our kind of usual business, and we will start with the review and approval of the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. I'll just open them up here on the screen. Okay, I think I know I need to change what I'm sharing. Okay, cool. So hopefully you can all see the minutes here from the previous meeting on the screen. So they've been distributed last week, and yeah, they're all in here in Confluence. So what I'm going to ask is, before we move to approving the minutes, if anyone's in need of additional time to review them. So yeah, please let me know. Otherwise, we will move to approving the minutes. Okay, I'm not seeing any comments or any hands being raised. So yeah, let's move on to the approval. So who wants to put forward the motion, please, approving the minutes?
Danielle, I'm happy to motion.
Thanks, Danielle. Do we have a second?
Jai, I'm happy to second.
Thanks, Jai. Right, let me now just. It's going to be a good challenge of my Zoom skills. So, okay, vote approval of meetings. Okay, here we go. Right, so you should all, yep, cool. Okay, I can see all the responses coming through. If you're not able to vote through the poll, just please drop your name in the chat. Okay, so we have 19, 20. So we have 15 responses. They've stopped coming through, so we might give it another 3 seconds or 4. All right, so I'll end the poll now. And we have 13 affirmative votes and 4 abstain, which means the motion has passed, and the meetings from the meeting minutes from the previous meeting are approved. Thank you for that. I'll go back to sharing the presentation. Okay. There was also a list here of some actions from the previous meetings. It's funny, they're all sitting with Heath. You know, happy days for you, Heath. So the first 3 actions, they've been marked as done, and there's still 2 actions that haven't been completed. So I'm not sure if you want to just provide a quick update on any of them, or if the
I think we're still working through those last 2.
Okay, that's cool. We'll keep tracking them. Thanks for that. There's a note here about missing AUPS profiles to be added. So I reckon at this stage, this is probably more for everybody's information than anything. So the review, and we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about this later on in this meeting. But a review we've done of the PS bundle and composition show that there are 2 profiles that are currently missing, and it will be proposed that they are included in the modeling. And I'm probably not just going to ask Danielle, so do we want to get through this approval now, or do we do it?
Yeah, I wanted to ask if there were any objections. We have the patient summary profile design principles of where we have core and IPS profiles. We do a patient summary profile, the ones that we've been walking through that show what those rules together for a resource to be compliant both to core and IPS is. And what we've realized in going through this and getting ready, obviously, for ballot and testing, is that we'd missed 2 of them. I just wanted to come back and check and confirm that no one has any objections to me including those two profiles that will then add to our walkthrough schedule for smoking status, which would be AU core smoking status, and the IPS one is observation social history tobacco use. And there's the path result observation one, which is AU core path result, and then the observation results lab/pathology in IPS. Any objections to us putting that in and then taking that into testing next week?
I don't see any
All right.
hands. Do we
I'll
need
try
to?
and magic that up in the next couple of days. No, I don't have to. Dushi's done work and we're reviewing it now. Sanjeev?
Just a question, Daniel. Will these be required or recommended?
They follow the section rules, which these aren't required sections. It's like if you include it, then here's the profile you have to comply to.
Nor recommended. They're optional.
Yeah, all optional.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay, so I think now it's over to you, Danielle, to take us through the profile walkthroughs. So
I should probably share screen.
Yep.
I've got lots of slides, and it's going to be different to how we've been doing it before. It's this. Can everybody see my slides now?
Yep.
All right, I'll do a share screen. I'm going to take a different approach here. We're going to start with bundle, because this is a document. Hopefully you've been following along and are familiar enough with the rules in IPS and in FHIR to know that, but we're going to go through a few of them today because I think we can't really look at the profile and is it doing the things we want it to? Is there anything missing without taking that step back around what is a patient summary document? What are the rules involved? How does a composition and a bundle work together? And then going through those walkthroughs, because a lot of the rules that if you're going to implement either IPS or patient summary and be like a conformance system aren't actually in the profiles. Some of it is a bunch of assumed knowledge or understanding how things work. And we're going to run through it because I really want to call people's attention to this. And we might therefore need to raise sort of attention on some of those aspects in guidance or in other parts. So I'm going to, obviously we've got the usual, this is what we wanted you to do, was have a look through profiles. Here's where we're up to. We're skipping procedure and encounter and going through composition and bundle, or at least starting that conversation, because from a patient summary perspective, these are where the whole, I actually have a patient summary rather than an individual resource kick in. Quick recap, this is the same slide we show every time. We're going to keep showing it to you, I think, for like the next 4 or 5 meetings as we go through profile walkthroughs. But this is this one. We have an agreed set of principles. These principles come about from our original decision, which is endorsed by both the CDG and at the TDG level, that we will be doing patient summaries in Australia, and they will be conformant to both AU core and IPS. And so part of that is the profile design principles, that we will validate resources against both the IPS profile, the corresponding one, and the AU core profile, when both are available. And that includes then the reference elements against those AUPS profiles where we've defined them, and that our value sets, and by our value sets, I mean the Australian ones localised in AU core that represent the work through AU CDI and AU base, are preferred over IPS profile value sets where they're equivalent binding. I'm actually going to skip past this one and go, let's take a step back, because this is where the bundle and the composition start to actually have to do some work. So this is a quick recap. This slide has been a across a few of our different meetings, both in the face-to-face on the CDG days and the TDG days, that the patient summary, standardized collection, it's for an individual. Rather, it's not an entire health record. It is a summary. And this is being viewed as the minimum sufficient data to facilitate safe, quality, and efficient care. We've got this next paragraph that I think has been relatively timely and has, I think, really summed up the efforts for this project, and that what we really are working through are the use of patient summaries in the Australian healthcare context and defining those for the consumer in their Australian healthcare journey. But we expect and we intend for this to provide the pathway for those individuals to share that data when travelling internationally. That's part of one of our reasons for being compliant to IPS. So the first iteration of AUPS is based on the IPS. It's not an IPS though, it's an Australian patient summary. It describes our local expectations and requirements for use of patient summaries within our Australian clinical workflows and contexts. So when is an AUPS an IPS? Pose that question. Does anyone have the answer? When did Australian patient summary become an international patient summary?
When you take it overseas.
100%, yes. As soon as you do that, yep.
I would think that because instances that conform to AUPS are expected to also conform to IPS, then an instance that conforms to AUPS will actually conform to IPS. So in a real sense, it is already an IPS whenever you've made one. It
is, yes. Both answers are correct. In an Australian context, we're actually going to pay more attention, obviously, to our local requirements. We're going to do that. But you're right, it's still an IPS. So it gets really treated like an IPS when it travels outside Australia and when it's consumed by an IPS document consumer. So even within Australia, there might be apps or systems or contexts that are just caring about the IPS level and aren't through how we've got like the referral to specialist, which really is, you know, taking into account some of those regulatory and other kind of funding arrangements. I think we can probably skip past this. This is part of what the CDG has kind of worked off in their understanding, which is all things that we agree with. It's interoperable. The expectation from the clinical design group contains as up-to-date information as possible based on what is available, could be asserted, could be not asserted, might include asserted or non-asserted information, portable, accessible, support people through their journey and transitions of care, compliant to core, compliant to IPS. I don't think there's anything surprising there, but Richard.
Looking at this, I'm wondering, have we been careful enough about distinguishing between what is expected of every instance of an AU patient summary and what is expected of the class of AU patient summaries? Because some of the stuff will be along the case of, if your system is producing Australian patient summaries, then you have to be able to produce these bundles of information that are complete enough to provide good continuity of care. But I might want to produce an instance which is just, in a sense, an extract of certain information for a particular situation. And are we wanting to say that that particular instance that was produced, while it was produced as part of an Australian patient summary system, is not, in fact, an Australian patient summary because it's really just an extract made according to the AU patient summary rules? And I think we've got two slightly different stories there that people will want to do with their implementations. Have we separated them out enough in the words that we've got?
Now, this isn't unique to us. The same conversation happens at the international level. There might be documents produced from IPS systems that are extracts, but they aren't meeting the requirements. And those requirements are the ISO 27, there's a number on the slide later on, requirements and expectations. So they might validate against the profile, but they might not actually be the proper conformant IPS view. And that we're going to have to leave, not necessarily this week, into getting into specifics, but that is where the obligations and the actors on like shall populate or should populate or whatever start to, I think, draw that picture, Richard.
Good, thank you. I didn't want an answer today. I just wanted to know whether we put enough effort into that separation. It sounds like we're on the path to doing that. Good.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's the path, yeah. And Sanjeet?
Couple of points and maybe more clarifications. This is about the second point in the slide. Will contain as up to date. What is up to date? It depends on the implementation and again, available sources.
Yes.
What are these available sources? Is it
Exactly.
so?
If you can only access the information within your system, that's your available source.
But what about up to date? And then again, it will depend on the kind of implementation, right? If you're doing dollar summary or dollar document reference. So,
well, these are the expectations from the clinical design group on what will be in a patient summary. A lot of these, and I think that's probably why I was bringing them up, these won't translate into bundle profile requirements, but if these are things that we have as expectations and behavior, we need to look at how we address these. And I think it's an ongoing concern of exactly what does up to date mean. It's intentionally, I guess, fluffy.
yeah, it is fluffy, right? Yeah. So,
yeah.
Is it latest or is it, I mean, what is up to date? Is it 6 months? Is it 1 year? I mean, is it a time frame or is it, what is it?
I think we should capture that as one of our hairy questions and just go, this is, and that we're seeking feedback on it, really. Yeah. Heath?
I think what, to some extent, what Richard was talking about as well feeds back to your question on the previous one. When does an AUPS become an IPS? And keeping in mind what the scope of an IPS actually is, and that it is for emergency unexpected care. It's not continuity of care. But as was potentially talking about here, and I guess it's an open question still, is what is the purpose of the AUPS within the Australian context? And is it more than just that emergency care scenario? So it's interesting, that question you posed, and you know, probably taking that one step beyond what the answers were. They were good answers, but to take it back to the definition of the IPS, which I'm trying to find the definition as we speak for everyone, but it is pretty much about that emergency care, unexpected care that's required.
It is, and it's IPS is designed also to allow for localizations to extend that use case into other summary use cases, and that's essentially what we're doing. We are extending that into Australia's workflow supporting transitions of care. Absolutely. So we do have a different nature to what we're paying attention to in the use case we're trying to support through Australian Patient Summary. So here's my as cut down as possible standards quagmire diagram I could put for us. We've seen versions of this before. You'll note the kangaroo. Forgive my icon usage throughout this. I've got a few nations in there, and it was a bit difficult trying to find free icons that weren't offensive for different nations. So I'll explain them as we go through. The kangaroo is Australia. So we have an Australian Patient Summary FHIR IG. We're going to localize IPS for our use case. We're going to comply with it. And we're going to comply with AU Core. And AU Core brings in a whole bunch of Australian localization through AU CDI. It's learnt from and compatible with US Core where possible. An IPA and gender harmony. And also in terms of patient summary, we have the AUCDI aspects that are patient summary, not just core, that are all coming into this. And so this is kind of the things. There's more, obviously, but this is kind of our context. And I've tried to draw, this is New Zealand, by the way, that's a Kiwi. New Zealand has a very similar sort of set of things. They're localizing IPS and they're going to comply with it. They have a New Zealand, it's called NZPS, but that is their set of data standards. It's published as a HISO standard. I should have put the number there. Whoops. But they have a set of data requirements there. They also have an NZ base, in which, yes, they do a imposed profile and do a bunch of things there that complies with. They don't have a core. So their thing sits in base, and their base also incorporates a whole bunch of like gender harmony sort of stuff. And this is Canada. I went Maple Leaf here. Canada is a bit more similar to Australia on where it's going. A lot of this is changing. There's both a CA baseline, which is more like AU base, and there's a CA Core Plus, which is going to be more like AU Core and US Core. There are requirements from the PCHDCF, which is, you can look it up. It's a long set of words, and there's also some for patient summary that do that. And they've done the same thing. They localize and comply with IPS. They've announced their intention that when CA Core is in place to do a very similar thing to what we're doing in Australia, that CA patient summary, that's the pan-Canadian one, will have its profiles, will do the same thing. Resources will comply to the IPS equivalent and the CA Core equivalent. So we're kind of, I've just picked out a few because I only had so much time to do diagrams. I could have done a few more. There's a lot of similarity going on around the world in terms of having sets of international data requirements addressed through IPS for the use case that is being looked at for jurisdictional patient summaries who are all complying with IPS. And the bread and the cheese is meant to be Europe. There's a European patient summary that was the best I could do. So what we've kind of got is like a national context, and all those national contexts, and that includes Europe, have things like a core going on, or in Europe they've got actually a whole bunch of different things they're working through. They've all got clinical data requirements, and in many cases there's a base, whether it's Canada baseline or Australia based, that all together are part of then driving what are the local requirements for their jurisdiction's workflow and needs. And then there's IPS in the international context, and there's this sort of quasi-boundary that as you move outside of these, you're defining your national patient summaries in the national healthcare context, but they are intended, all of them, to be able to be used as IPSs in an international context. All of the nations are doing that. And IPS itself is defining what will systems that can produce and consume IPS conformant documents understand, how will they deal with them, what should they be doing? And then we've got this kind of third use case, which is where they're not Australian patient summaries, but where you have international patient summaries being used within a national healthcare context. That one's a little bit less under formal projects that are being run. So we've got some specifications for these different kind of categories of use case. The IPS FHIR IG and all the things it's conforming to, oops, I clicked on that, are handling international patient summary use case. For us, AU patient summary is handling our national patient summaries in a national healthcare context while ensuring that they can be used as an IPS in an IPS context. And that the jurisdictional IGs, we're one of them, are going to have from the National IG Council have asked that every jurisdictional IG that is intending to be compliant with IPS adds into its IG a description of the limitations or the things to be wary of if you are receiving an IPS document that doesn't meet your national patient summary expectations. Sanjeet.
Daniel, about point 3, would there be a requirement to consume international patient summaries?
No,
only?
there is not.
Okay.
How are we going so far? Are people sort of, is this following for people tracking? Do we have any other questions? All right, I'm going to give you a few more diagrams. Sorry.
Sorry. I threw into the chat just because that's the first time I've actually thought of ISO. I never realized they've got one too. Everyone's got their standard. Love it. So is something going to happen to the ISO standard if this gets traction, or well,
it already has. So the IPS FHIR IG is a implementation in FHIR that supports the production of conformant patient summary documents that meet that ISO standard set of data requirements. So that defines things like cardinality and you know which things have must support on them. All that sort of conformance requirement is defined by that ISO standard.
Yep. It's requirements, David. It is not an implementation, it is requirements. And there are 2 implementation guides of that ISO standard, one which is using HL7 CDA, which has been around for quite some time, but not implemented very much. And then there's this FHIR one, which basically the FHIR IPS is derived from the requirements of that. And they are very strict in trying to maintain that alignment, especially around conformance.
Right.
Well, so I have referenced it a little bit. Yeah.
2 views. One is you totally meet your requirements, and the other is no.
It's a guiding principle.
Yeah.
All right. Good to know. Thanks.
And part of that will come into, and why I'm doing this, come into when we're talking about the bundle and the composition rules, where those requirements are coming from. And a bunch of them are coming from the ISO standard. Okay, so here's my snappy diagram for traveling around the world. So the AU patient summary will work within Australia's borders for the Australian use cases for which we're, are implementing Australian patient summaries. And when you take it outside the country, you're going on a whirlwind tour, you go to New Zealand, Canada, Europe, the AUPS document acts like an IPS document outside of Australia. Same thing for Canada. Within Canada's borders, the Pan-Canadian document acts within their national healthcare context rules. And then when it gets taken outside, it acts like an IPS document. So that's kind of the theory behind a bunch of the localization. And one of the advantages of all being compliant to IPS is that we then have that aspect. There's some caveats to that. This is really wordy because I was writing this up this morning and ran out of time to do, again, cool diagrams. Right, so I think actually I'll come back to this one later, will I? Oh, no, this is important because I've talked about leaving the country. I haven't talked a little bit about that point 3 and coming back and the whole limitation aspect because as Sanjeet asked, it's not a requirement to consume IPS documents. Now, so a person traveling to Canada might be able to share their AU patient summary document with a system that can consume IPS documents and have the IPS parts of it consumed. We have additional must supports in ours. So the system that's consuming it might be able to process those, but it might not. We can reliably know that it will at least understand the parts as defined by the IPS FHIR IG. It may be enough, but it might not be to be directly used where a pan-Canadian patient summary or even a further jurisdictional Canadian patient summary is used. But for Canadian citizens, this wouldn't document their information in such a way for use in transfers of care, or that include their local regulatory requirements or the clinical requirements that best match and provide the right information for them. So it's not advised to be used if you can actually and should use the Canadian one. So I wanted to kind of talk about that in the other direction. All right, I'll move on past that because I feel like I'm belaboring a point that we're comfortable with. So the bundle and the composition profiles, which we're now getting to, are all about the document. So the IPS bundle and IPS composition are part of describing the international use case expectations. A UPS bundle and composition, part of describing our Australian national use case expectations. Noting part of that is often the actors and the obligations, right? The profile will flag those, but then the actual requirements around production and so forth, going to what Richard was asking, are often those descriptions. So that'll be next step to talk through that in the conformance proposal. What I wanted to do is call out, I've been saying document, 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 because patient summary is a FHIR document. IPS is a FHIR document, and FHIR documents have rules according to FHIR. These aren't necessarily called out by the IPS spec, and they're not in the AU patient summary spec either. They are assumed knowledge. I think we have a link off to, and you need to be familiar with the requirements of FHIR documents. And before we go into the bundle profile and composition, I wanted to walk through those with everyone here. I thought that was probably a really good step. Are people interested in doing that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Okay, so there's a bunch of slides here, and we can go off to the FHIR standard and have a look at things in particular. But let's just run through. Okay, so a FHIR document bundle of type document that starts with a composition. One of the things that gets people is it contains specific frozen versions of other resources. This comes down because it ends up becoming immutable. We'll go into that in a bit more detail about how you have to create and manage these. And it comes also down to referencing, and that relative references that may be resolved off by your server are actually kind of breaking that whole chain of how this works, because they might actually just be referencing the latest version of a resource, not the specific version at the time of bundle assembly. Yes, FHIR documents can be both a bundle document, which is our requirement, and a document reference one. Document references are for really just non-FHIR things. You can ref off to a PDF or some kind of CDA document. But these two resource types, bundle and composition. So the bundle is the container. It's the container of those resources in the document. Everything that you're like, this is what makes up the document at this point of time, should be in there. And there are some rules on the limits of what you put in there, and like the minimum kind of stuff that you have to put in. The composition, so the bundle is really the container, and the composition is that clinical context. It sets what is the purpose of this document. So it has type of patient summary. It has who the target of this is, the patient, who's been involved in assembling it, what kind of time happened, what events does this cover, and it divides up that document into all those sections, and each of those sections have their own human readable narrative, and they reference the structures underneath them to say, here's what's in that section. And at any point in time that I'm running through this, or you have a question, please put your hand up and we can like dig into a bit more detail. Okay, here's requirements on inclusion. You shall only include the following things: composition resource, resources you reference from the composition. The directly or indirectly is that some resources are referenced by others. So for example, the author of a composition might be a practitioner role, and that practitioner role might reference a practitioner in an organization. So that's that recursive indirect referencing. You don't actually have a specific entry inside the composition for the practitioner role. It's coming off the organization. It's coming from practitioner role. It can also contain a binary, which is about the style sheet, because you can actually share preferred formatting with style sheets, and that can go along with the bundle, so it can be a bit self-contained in that way. You can also include provenance resources that target one of those other ones up here, either the composition or the direct or indirect, because the way provenance gets referenced is provenance actually references its targets. And so it's got to be that direction. There is one invariant on the bundle resource, and therefore in our profiles that enforces this, which is this one. And it, by the way, says your bundle has to have a composition as its first resource. So the very first thing you mention has to be composition, and then you can include other resources. Any questions about this bit?
No, makes sense.
All right. Into some more detail. Okie dokie, this bit. So the other bit was constraining, like the scope, that you weren't allowed to put other things in there. So you can't just put in a medication that isn't referenced somewhere from either the composition or something else that then calls out to it. This one, however, does your minimum. You have to include in the bundle things referenced from these points. So the resource reference from composition subject, actually I think I've got it, has to be included. I've got in orange the notations that come from the IPS rules. So composition subject is one and only one, and it's a must support. If you reference something in composition encounter, this is optional. There is no must support requirement in IPS, or therefore in AUPS. Then you have to include it, but that's just a FHIR document rule, that there are no requirements on producers of IPS conformant documents to actually fill that out. Composition author, one to many. So you can have multiple composition authors. You have to have at least one, and every one you reference has to be in the bundle. And that's also a must support requirement in IPS and AUPS. Composition attester party. So this is where attestation comes into it. This is optional attestation. And then also including the party is optional as well. You can only have one of them. Only one entity can attest to the composition. If you include them, they have to be in the bundle. Similar with composition, that's also must support. There can only be one entity that is the custodian of this document. There's section author and there's section focus, neither of which are must support in IPS or AUPS. I don't actually particularly think they will come up in R1, but if they do, or if people include them, they need to be in the bundle. And then we come to composition section entry. So this is essentially the resources referenced by the document. All the resources referenced by the document, where you've got the document sections, whether it's medications, allergies, etc., need to be included. And then it's up to you or your implementation in your system context on if you're including the next level down. So I gave that example of the practitioner role. And there's also this one. We've got, for example, a number of our profiles like medication request have must support on reason reference. So if you reference a condition in medication request.reason reference, there is not a hard requirement to actually include that in the bundle. It's generally recommended to include things, especially for transitions of care, and especially where that receiving system has no capability to go and resolve that reference. But it's not a hard requirement by FHIR or by IPS or AUPS at this time. We could make one if we feel we need to, but trying to decide a line of recursive referencing gets, I think, a bit hard. So at the moment, it's left up to implementations to do what makes sense for their use case. Next bit, identifiers. One's mandatory, one's optional. It is important to know the difference between these two, please. Mandatory is bundle identifier. Globally unique for this instance of the document, never reused, including other documents derived from the same composition. This gets a bit tricky. And then you've got composition identifier. That's your business ID. It travels through all the different documents that are derived from this composition. There is a invariant here that if your bundle is of type document, it enforces identifier and it enforces that with a system and a value. So you can't just dar it or put in a data absent reason. You do have to complete this. Any comments or questions around these kind of identifiers or this requirement? All right, let's kick on to dates. So there's a couple of mandatory ones, a couple of optional ones. Top one, document date. That is bundle.timestamp. That's when the bundle was assembled. That is considered to be the date of the document. There is an invariant here. The document must have a date that will be enforced through the profiles. There's also composition date, which is when the author wrote the document logically. So you may not have constructed the bundle and then sent it out yet. You may already have this composition there. And that mandatoriness is enforced by the composition resource. So they're both going to be present. They may not be the same thing. Obviously, there's rules that, for example, your composition date can't be later than your bundle date. And then you've got other ones about attestation, which is the time it was witnessed. Again, there's expectations around when that would be versus when you're going to see document dates and composition dates. And then you've got last modified. That becomes really interesting because that doesn't always mean logical last update. It could be the addition of security tags or something else that was updated in the resource. Which might have happened, and then, for example, it was assembled in a bundle. So you might have all these different dates. Does anyone want to go into any more convo on these ones? All right, let's do this one. This is where it starts to get a little bit more documenty. So, signing. We've got an example of that in our use case where we were saying, yes, we're going to have one that shows a digital signature. There are rules on digital signatures and what you have to do. They're mostly shoulds, though there's a data type around that. There's an expectation, obviously, it's signed by the attester of the document, that it should contain, there's some things here for those people who actually want to go into signatures. I won't describe them here. That's part of the digital signatures page in FHIR that provides enough information to actually go match to who signed this. Once we get into the bundle, which is that frozen resources, you've assembled it, it's got whatever signature it's going to have, you've got the timestamp, it is immutable. Its content can't be changed, the document ID can't be reused. You are allowed to do it in either, you can have both JSON and XML and convert between them. And this comes into how resources are referenced and why a patient resource must be included in the bundle. We don't mean the latest, maybe their address has changed or anything like that. We mean that this is the information known at the time that makes up that document. Are there any questions around that? Oh, yes, this is, is that different to what people expected would be the requirements for implementing FHIR document for patient summary?
A question has occurred to me about referenced content. There's different ways to reference content using the reference resource. Is this requirement for that a little vague, or does it say that the patient has to be referenced by composition .subject .reference, or are you allowed to do things like composition .subject .reference .identifier or things, or .name or things like that?
So you've picked up on one of the big things that is actually added in IPS, which is where we've seen over the last few days, last few meetings, that patient.reference is now one-to-one and must support. In all the atomic ones, it's also in the composition for that reason. Interestingly, it's only patient.
So the author can be just the author. You might not have a practitioner resource. You might simply have a string in the composition.
No, I don't think so. I think the rules, because the composition doesn't have to be inside a FHIR bundle, but we have rules on the bundle that make how the composition works or what happens in the bundle do different things. Here, you have to include the resources referenced in that bundle to be conformant.
So any resource that's referenced from the composition, I'm going to say should, because there's a little bit of ambiguity about it, but basically that's the guidelines, is that they really should be within the same bundle. All right. Yeah. So any directly referenced resource from the composition, but then a resource that's referenced from an entry doesn't have to be.
It does.
That's not.
Yeah.
So
I guess I'm wondering
maybe
around the exact meaning of. I guess I'm wondering around the meaning of referenced, because reference has reference.reference, which is obviously in scope, yes. But there's also reference.identifier and there's reference.text or string or display. Yes. And so in some sense, you could say reference.identifier references a patient, but you could say, but that's not the intent of this thing here. And I just wondering, is there clarity around that?
There is a little bit. There are some specifics for some types of references. There's also part of the mechanics of how bundle works, in that every entry shall be represented with a full URL. So it is possible to have that resource, let's say practitioner role, included in the bundle with a full URL, which I don't know, maybe it's a UUID, but how you have referenced that in other places isn't referencing the full URL, it's referencing an ID on that resource you've included and is matching it that way, but it has to be in the bundle, and the expectation of the system is it actually goes and resolves it to what's in the bundle. It's only required for, at the moment, via our profiles, that patients have the reference element is mandatory. You could also do display and identifier, but reference is mandatory. I've never seen anyone not do that, actually. I've had a look at a whole bunch of different people who are implementing. I've not seen anyone do it, so I'm not actually sure how common it is. And we also have Sanjeet.
I think, Richard, you wanted to add something?
No, nothing more to add.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, on the next slide, you have got the key info element. I'm assuming that would be discussed as part of DDG. Now,
which one was it? Is it this one?
it's about the digital signature. It's the next slide.
Oh, here.
Key
Well, so maybe.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this question is because I'm assuming there'll be a corresponding change on the vendor side as well to capture this element, data for this element.
So right now, it's a maybe. It's fully optional.
Okay.
Neither, it is not a must support element. It is part of how documents could be done, but there is no requirement to sign. Signing is defined by how you need to do it in FHIR, but neither IPS, and at this point, we have not discussed including any specific rules on it. I honestly think we should probably talk about it and have a bit of guidance in there on this.
Agreed.
Yeah, and we might even, and I think I was like putting all this, and then we'll go to the bundle profile, and we'll actually see that a whole bunch of these things aren't flagged as must support, which is really interesting because they are how documents work, and we need to go, well, do we have enough information here to guide how to do this consistently? All right. Okay, a bit more. So that was my end of my, I think really the major kind of points I wanted to call out about FHIR documents. There are some more specifics. They're on the FHIR documents page, but they're kind of some of the big things of if there's a document, there's a whole bunch of things, and that's why they're also in the IPS profile. Or sometimes they're not actually in our profiles, but they are a requirement nonetheless to be a valid FHIR document. And we might choose, I think I'm starting to lean that way, to draw attention to that so that we don't have these gotchas for people going, I had no idea that was, you know, a requirement because it's not in the profile or in the IG. Okay, I'm going to skip past this one. It's only relevant later. Right, let's talk about a patient summary, an AU patient summary document. We've talked about, oops, I keep trying to drag around a screen thing that you can't see because it's a Zoom thing and it's getting in the way. So an Australian patient summary document, and we've just kind of talked about the use case and the localization, the context. We've got an Australian patient summary document is valid if the resources it references, so the ones inside it, validate against the corresponding IPS profile that exists and the AU core profile. That's our profile design principles. We've kind of, and that's PDP in that arrow, we've translated that over to these steps. There's fallback options here. Just run through them, make sure this is what people are expecting. An Australian patient summary document is considered valid if the resources it references validate against the corresponding AUPS profiles where they exist. I've got grammar problem there, but that's where they exist. And then the next one, which is where there is no AUPS profile or no AU core, it validates against the IPS profile where only the IPS profile exists. And then if there's no IPS profile, but you have an AU core one, then it validates against the AU core profile. And the last point is that where there is no IPS profile, AU core profile, or patient summary profile, at the moment, it's validating against the core FHIR standard. Richard?
So this doesn't assume that AUPS profiles conform to IPS profiles and that IPS profiles conform to AU core.
It does. I've tried to go in the circumstance. So point 2 is where only an IPS profile exists. So where there's no AUPS profile.
Okay.
So first point is AUPS profile because that is covering it. It's where we don't, and we haven't introduced AUPS profiles where we don't have a corresponding AU core, and at this point haven't identified a need for additional requirements.
Yeah.
Pregnancy
I'm just
status is an
thinking,
example of that.
Yeah, pregnancy status.
I'm thinking if you think of so validates against IPS where only the IPS profile exists. Yeah, sorry, my mistake.
No, that's okay.
So because the AUPS, say, composition is derived from or complies with the IPS, it brings in some of these IPS profiles that we currently do not have an AU core profile for, such as pregnancy status. And that's
yes,
point two.
I understand the intent. I just misled by the wording as to whether the wording was implying things that it shouldn't, but I think it's fine.
I have a question to the group. It's come up in a couple of conversations with people who've raised this for me, to me, and it also came up in a recent conformance session. So that's that last point 4. So where there's no AUPS profile, no AU core profile, no IPS profile, the moment that's covered by the FHIR standard. But we have AU base. And we made a choice in AU core to say where we have an AU base profile resource that we would type to that one until an AU core one came along. So there's a couple of examples there where the composition in AUPS and the bundle would reference medication administration and medication dispense. Is there interest from the group in us calling out AU base?
So what you mean by that is explicitly referencing AU-based medication administration, where IPS just says medication administration?
Yes. It's the Australian requirements, not that it actually particularly, it doesn't really have a lot of data quality aspects in it, but what it would have, for example, is the medication strength extension that we've been working on in the Australian FHIR group, and a whole number of other things around the Australian terminologies and identifiers. So I think there's some potential value there in describing part of the Australian healthcare context with the base profile. I'm of two minds about it, but I wanted to raise it to this group for us to consider. Richard?
It's not actually a validation constraint. Mentioning AU base only to a very limited extent constrains things. It's more an informative thing. So I think the language that mentions AU base should be language about look here for guidance rather than make sure you don't break the rules off, because I think by and large there's no rules in AU base. And the point in looking at it is to find the guidance rather than to find the rules that you've got to comply with.
Which we could do in a guidance section rather than pointing to them directly inside either the bundle or the composition. We could leave those as the unconstrained resource and add a guidance section around resources that aren't yet profiled and that we encourage people to look at AU base. We could do that. Heath?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think otherwise we're going to be in a position where we're going to never stop, especially for R1, basically. So I think for R1, I think it's okay. I mean, we'll probably get there, but I think we'll get there when we've actually got an AU core version of these things.
Is there any guidance? Is there any interest then in, because I'm quite happy to accept that. I wanted to raise this because a few people have asked about it and I thought, oh, yeah, I could sort of see some value. But is there interest then in actually including that guidance to direct people to go look at AU base for those corresponding resources, for guidance on constructing resources in an Australian context?
I think it's worth having a paragraph somewhere saying, hey, look, the context of this involves an AU base, which has some useful extensions.
Can we put a note for that in the minutes? There is a localization section, I think, that we have to create to satisfy, talking about localizing IPS, that I think that could go there. and bring that back.
And just to tie it back to the conformance, I did add an extra principle as a result of that conversation, that we would somehow refer or recommend the use of AU base for this circumstance.
Have the others done the same? Have the others that have, is there a CA base or an NZ base or something like that that they refer to as well?
The
CA is probably not a good example because they have basically, they don't even derive formally from IPS. They've pretty much created a CA from scratch.
They are, when I was describing different ways we can do this, they are in formal alignment. So it has been humans who write everything and make a determination themselves that it is appropriate. I think they've tested that, but it's not using a formal structure like impose profile or derive. And they've done that. However, they have signaled that they will be moving to and evaluating the use of these options when CA Core Plus is available to do so.
That being said, I think it's still valuable to have some commentary in there, because I think in actually, when actually doing an implementation, you just sometimes just need some guidance. That would be useful.
All right. I think that might be the end of my context slides. Apology that I guess that this was a big talk fest from me. I think, okay, how long do we have left and how much do we have to do? I think
50 minutes.
What if, sorry, how long?
Is it 50 minutes? Have we got an hour and a half?
We do. Didn't we start at 10?
Sorry.
Yeah, so you got 20 minutes
we're,
left.
We're actually on time for this section, Danielle.
Yeah, I was contemplating, is it worth me opening the, how about, I'm going to leave it. We will start like with the bundle profile next call. I think I've given you enough context to go look at the bundle profile now. And I am explicitly stating that a whole bunch of the rules we just talked about, they're not very obvious, or in cases they're not actually in there. And we need to look at that and how much we want to draw attention to things or not. But it's there. We'll walk through it next time. So I'll stop sharing and hand over to the next person. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Danielle. Very comprehensive presentation. Now I think we have Shelley, who's going to talk to us about the use cases. Shelley, over to you. Do you want me to share? Oh, share the screen. Cool.
Most everyone can see that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm just going to take a moment to walk you through how we're running the review process for the AU patient summary use cases prior to ballot for comment. So we're now officially inviting community feedback on each of the published use cases via dedicated Confluence pages. So we've set up these pages to make it easy for you to review the content, ask questions and provide suggestions so that we can get them in good shape before we move to ballot for comment. So you can access the review pages using the links here, and each one corresponds to a specific use case. So we've got the interstate GP visit, and we've also got the referral to specialist and allied health. And these will take you directly to the review workspace in Confluence, and I've also posted the links in the chat. So we might move over to the Confluence page so we can just have a look at that. So each page includes a link to the corresponding FHIR IG. So if I just click on that, that'll take you there. So you can go and review that. And then you can come back and put your comments. So we've got a structured feedback table here, and this is where we'd like you to leave your comments. So to provide feedback, you just need to log in. So you will need a HL7 account so you can log in. And then you need to just click on edit here. And then you can just go down and pop your feedback in here. So just make sure that you include your name and the date. And this just helps us follow up with you if we need any more clarification. And it also makes it easy to track who said what. If you run out of rows and you need to add another row, you can do so just up the top here. There's a little, where are we? little button to add some rows if we click in the table. So you can just click on this here, plus to insert an extra row. And then once you're finished, you can just click on update. So all of your feedback will be reviewed by the editorial team and triaged ahead of the ballot. The review period's open now. We've given you a couple of weeks, so it'll close on the 28th of June. Did anyone have any questions regarding the review process? Does that seem pretty straightforward to everyone? Hearing none, so I might hand back to you, Ricardo, and look forward to getting everyone's feedback.
So thanks for that, Shelley. Next on the agenda, we have Steve, who will be talking to us about testing scenarios and priorities. So again, Steve, do you want me to share my screen, or are you happy to share from your end?
It'd be great if you could share, please, Ricardo.
Yep. Give me a sec. All right. All right, just let me know when you want me to move to the next one.
Okay, no worries, thanks. All right, so we've got a combined sparked testing event happening on the 24th of June in Brisbane, so a little over a week away. And this is covering AU Core and Patient Summary and our other IGs, e-requesting, etc. But for Patient Summary, our priorities and I guess our test scenarios for this event, it's a one-day event, is really about focusing on your own use case. So being able to produce a patient summary or being able to consume a patient summary. And we're interested in knowing how you're generating that patient summary. So are you generating a snapshot? Is it on demand? And also, how are you exchanging? So we've had a fair bit of a chat over the last few weeks around the methods of exchanging in terms of smart health links or public key encryption using tokens, or is it just an internal share between your own system? We'd be really keen to know all of that information. So that'll help inform our use cases, our guidance, but also look at the coverage that we're getting. So one of the big things that we want to do is also look at if your patient summary is conforming. So we're looking at patient summaries in an Australian clinical context. If your use case is IPS, then you might be producing an IPS. But what we're really looking at is for that Australian clinical context. So looking at if it conforms to the rules that we're coming up with. So on the next slide. So from our last, the Sydney Connectathon, we did get a bit of test coverage, but we do need a lot more coverage across all of the profiles. So there's quite a lengthy list of the profiles that we need support for, plus also the particular elements within that, and the interactions also. So we can capture details on everything that you're using. We're going to have people on the ground that will be able to help you test and help you record your test results. And as I said earlier, we're also looking at if you're using the different interactions like dollar summary, doc ref, bundle, document reference, any form of patient summary exchange would be really interesting to capture so that can inform our test result coverage. I've got a link there at the bottom. That's the link to the Confluence page, specifically talking about our patient summary FHIR IG testing. It has all of our coverage, and that'll be updated as we go along through the test event based on the feedback that we get back. In terms of testing support, which is the next slide, please, Ricardo. So on the day, we're going to have an Inferno server. So this will be for testing FHIR servers. I'm hoping that we're going to have some feature files generated off the implementation guide. This is a new output that I'm hoping to bring on the day. And this will be for testing FHIR clients. So if you've got a consumer of a patient summary, you might be able to run through some feature files to verify your test coverage there. We've got a bunch of test data. So we have our HL7AU test data repository. I've managed to grab some international IPS test data examples, and we're looking at getting some from other regions as well. And I guess on the day, we're going to be pretty keen to see if you can contribute some test data examples as well, which we might be able to add those to the HL7 repository, or if you've got them linked somewhere, we can send links around to those so that people can get a really rich testing scenario out of that test data. We're also hoping to have some REST client collections. So for different REST tools, Postman, Insomnia, having the ability to make REST requests and send data and retrieve data and really drive your clients. We do have a Sparked FHIR server, so this will be loaded up with the IGs and the test data. As I mentioned, we're going to have a bunch of Sparked people available to help you get up and running with testing, helping you test, and then also capture those test results. So we have a spreadsheet that we'll be able to fill out. We can also take offline versions of that spreadsheet and any other reports that you might have. So Inferno results, etc. And then we can collate all those. And as part of the Sparked privacy policy, those will all be destroyed after analysis. So if you've got any secrets or tokens or usernames and passwords in some of those requests, those will all be deleted after we analyze those. And then we'll be able to report back on our updated coverage across all those different profiles and interactions. But yeah, that's happening on the 24th of Brisbane. 24th of June in Brisbane, and hopefully we'll see some of you there. Thanks, Ricardo.
All right, thanks, Steve. All right.
Danielle has a question actually.
Oh yeah.
Thanks. So could we go back to the testing priorities page?
Yep.
I think, and we've got time. Can we go back about community testing needs? So part of this is obviously, we've got stuff for the FHIR IG. Go back and again, previous slide.
Yep.
So what should we be focusing on testing? And I'd like to ask that from the people on the line here. What, in terms of like structuring test events and providing support for things, and also just for the Australian Patient Summary Project, what things do you think we should be testing? Maybe we should have had a Menti for that. That would have been helpful. But oops, it didn't occur to me.
Well, I think at the moment, I think a lot of people are looking at content. Certainly for us, we're looking at content. But I think at some point we will need to look at how we do the exchange, and the exchange is a bit more complicated, particularly around that third bullet that you've got there. How do we do that? That probably needs a little organizing if we're going to try and achieve that. So I think that's further down the line as opposed to something that you're going to do in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Is there anyone else who is going to be focusing on content, or on like assembling bundles out of content, or pulling from multiple sources?
Look, I can speak on behalf of the agency, and we're definitely still on that stage too. So we're going to be playing with the content more than anything else at the moment. So I think that makes sense for us too.
That's really interesting. All right, thank you.
All right. If Did you have anything in mind, Danielle, also that you wanted to add from your perspective that we could be potentially considering?
No. I mean, we've got some of the, so to support, I think part of what Steve and I will be making sure is that we have support and some focus on as we go through different events is to enable the decisions and kind of the topics that are coming up through the calls get carried through to the testing events. And then we've got, which I guess is a complementary concern, is people who are implementing patient summaries and some of the needs and the sorts of data that would be best do both of those, I think, at the same time. So I think we're coming in for testing events, and as we get closer, including for the Connectathon, I think it's a good topic for us to have a call on and put on the agenda to discuss what of kind of some of maybe the recent decisions or some of the things we're even contemplating. Do we need to provide any guidance at all in the IG that we sort of think, are any of these the kinds of things that we want to ask for community to come test on?
Yep. Makes sense. All right. With the time that we've got left, so we'll just quickly go through the next steps. So again, just a quick reminder on what we're working towards in terms of timeframes and the key milestones we have still ahead of us. We'll have the next meeting in our calendar scheduled for the 27th of June. Of kind of special relevance for that meeting is we'll do a walkthrough of the encounter and the AUPS profile. So what's the profile on this one, Danielle? Sorry. Encounter.
Yeah, sorry. I think based on where we got to today, we're actually going to go back to bundle. We're going to
bundle,
put the profile front and center and actually go through it now that we've done all the background.
Yep, cool. And we'll go through again some of the use case feedback and also do a bit of have a bit of a discussion around the AUCDI mapping. There's just a call out here for items for the agenda. So if anyone has anything they want to suggest, feel free to do it now or just send us an email after the meeting and we'll consider adding it to the meeting. Okay. Can't see any hands, but as I said, if there's anything, just let us know. Some actions here for the next fortnight. So review, allocate some time to review the profiles that are currently in the PS FHIR IG. If there's things that don't make sense, or if there's things that might pose a bit of a challenge for you on your implementations and for your use cases, just bring them up at the meeting because we want to get on top of this ahead of the ballot for sure. If there's a change you want to propose, go ahead and create it and just log an issue in Jira. And I think lastly, if you could also spend some time reviewing the use cases and providing feedback, that would be much appreciated. All right, I think this is all from us today. So thank you very much for your attendance as always. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time, and you all have a great weekend. And thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, man.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ricardo.